views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. A few weeks ago, there was a horrible stabbing in a Bronx high school in which a student who claimed to have been bullied stabbed two students. One died and the other was seriously injured. Immediately after, there were claims that the school building itself was not secure, and others decried the lack of support for students who are being bullied. Both of these issues require significant attention for both the specific incident and also in a more general way on keeping schools safe and helping those who are in conflict. Tonight we have experts with us in both fields to explore the aftermath of that school stabbing. Please join me in welcoming back to Bronx Talk former NYPD Lieutenant, Pace University professor, and frequent network news commentator on criminal justice issues, my good friend Darrin Porcher. Nice to see you, Dr.
Thank you,
Porcher.
Gary. It's always a pleasure.
And the conflict closer, a communication and conflict resolution expert from the Bronx, Lynne Maureen Hurdle. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Dr. Porcher, let's start with you. So we've had this horrible incident. It's absolutely an unspeakable tragedy of epic proportions, really, in a high school that other students got to see. A young man, two young men were stabbed, one died. Do you look at that situation and say, gee whiz, the school did not do its job in terms of keeping students safe because there were no metal detectors at the time and those kinds of things?
Well, it's really difficult to blame the school. You have to look at what the student population participated in. And one of the things that I saw with that situation was you have a lot of educators that are at the forefront in managing the safety in these schools. I understand that to a degree. Generally speaking, in every school you have someone that's referred to as a dean of discipline, and that's the individual that's tasked with maintaining those types of situations, conflicts that happen among students, and implementing a sense of discipline. But oftentimes that dean of discipline is in place by means of the default, whereas they've just been thrown into that position. So we need subject matter experts to manage these types of conflicts that come into play in the schools. Like my counterpart here, for example, is a conflict resolution expert. I think that you need those types of resources employed in these schools because you really need an organizational change and a cultural change in the school system because that's key to managing this violence that we have. And one of the first things that we hear from everyone is the one fixed solution by police. We need to either arrest our way out of these situations or deploy a sense of forward policing strategies.
Like metal detectors.
Right, exactly. We can line the perimeter with tanks. That's not necessarily going to fix the problem. It's a one fixed solution. And as we progress further into this conversation, we'll talk more about that. But I'm sure my counterpart would have some great strategies and recommendations.
I want to follow up with that because, you know, we deal with a lot of different issues. Let's say drug use is one of them. And we ask the police department to police these areas. And then I always feel like we're asking the police to solve problems that may be a little bit out of their realm of policing. And you've just addressed, well, if you want to keep the schools safe, it may not be a police answer.
Right.
So what about all the parents and others who are saying, we have to have metal detectors, and one of the issues was we didn't have metal detectors, and they were criticizing the mayor and criticizing everybody in sight of having metal detectors. Is that a necessary and important tool in this process? Not separating what you said and certainly what Lynne is going to say. But is that a necessary thing for this and other schools, metal detectors?
I don't think it's necessary. There's no one fixed solution. We have 6% of all of the schools that have metal detectors, and you still have violence that occurs in these schools. I think what the key is, you need the infusion of the educator and the law enforcement professional, but the educator needs to be at the forefront. And what the law enforcement professional would do is strictly provide their expertise or recommendations to the educator, and the educator would then deploy that. Because when we look at a school in, let's say, the South Bronx, where we just had the stabbing recently in, on West Farms, in that area, you're going to have a very different dynamic of violence than you would in a school like in Forest Hills. The schools in Forest Hills do have violence issues, such as the opioid crisis, things to that effect, but it's not a one fixed solution, and it goes back to you need those multiple components of resources with the expertise of the educators and the law enforcement, and the educator needs to be at the forefront.
All right, before we bring Ms. Hurdle into the equation, just one final question. So then you think that maybe the parents who were saying we must have metal detectors, there was a lot of people banging their fist on the table, how could you not have metal detectors? You think that's unnecessary, or is it an important part of a component to keeping many of our city schools safe?
I think it's a panacea for the outcry for what just occurred. But the truth of the matter is, it's not just a metal detector issue, it's more of a management issue in these schools. And a lot of that can effectively be done without metal detectors.
Wow.
And that being said, a lot of it, you have to look at these conflicts that happen outside. This particular case that we had in the school in the Bronx, it evolved from a bullying incident that was happening in the school. But many of our conflicts that happen in the schools occur, or a byproduct or a result from things that happen outside of the school, and they transfer into the school. So you need to have
let me just interject 1 second. So that's exactly what I was saying. So then we're asking the teachers and the schools to, quote unquote, police something that is not really of their doing. They're just getting the residuals, much like we as police solve our drug problem for us through your criminal justice methods. It's really out of their realm.
Yeah, you have to have the two layers to communicate. One being, and my recommendation would be the Community Affairs Bureau in the NYPD. They have a far more softer approach. And what they can do is they can elicit the intelligence that happens outside and translate that information to the educators in the school, and then they can apply as a solution, as opposed to just the two hands. The right hand doesn't communicate with the left.
You know, you really couldn't have asked for a better introduction, I think, for what our conflict resolution expert is going to talk about, because here's a criminal justice professional who comments on criminal justice issues, and his reaction was not a technical criminal justice solution, but really was a solution about conflict resolution. How bad do you think the bullying problem is? I know it's hard to measure in total, but in your interaction with young people and your sense.
I'm going to say it's really bad, and I'm going to say it's been that way for quite some time. I think that schools, I love what you said, because I think that what we need to do is to bring community together, meaning school community. So that means if we're talking about NYPD along with the school community, administrators, teachers, parents, students, please have students at the table who can talk about what's going on in the schools. I think that that's really important. I understand as a parent that immediate reaction, oh my God, metal detectors, like we gotta do something now, right? But the truth is, the biggest weapon that we have is ourselves, honestly. You can leave the weapons all at the front, but how do we interact with one another if we are not teaching the skills to our students, to our administrators, to our teachers, to everybody's there, school safety? If we're not on the same page about how we talk, how we resolve conflict, even how we come to conflict, meaning how we look at it, we're not on the same page there. We don't need the extra weapons, because we have ourselves, we have our mouths, we have our fists, and that's what we're seeing in reaction to conflict.
You know, there was a story in the Times this week that said 10% of New York City school children have been homeless at some time during the year. The poverty rate, we know what that is about. The children are bringing in immense problems, much like I've already addressed twice, that we ask the police to solve problems that may not be within their jurisdiction. The teachers who are in a social setting are being asked to deal with situations like this. Can you understand, even from a teacher's point of view, that, you know what, all the conflict resolution stuff aside, I'd rather not have a knife in my classroom regardless, because I understand what you're saying, but even I'm endangered if we don't have metal detectors in the school.
I understand that from a teacher's point of view, but I'm going to say that most teachers that I've worked with, because I've been a teacher coach alongside, I taught as well, but I've been a teacher coach for over 25 years. Most teachers that I work with actually want to bring the social and emotional learning into the schools. They feel that it's really necessary. You talked about homelessness. You talked about the social issues that our children are dealing with. Well, if they're coming into school, where are they going to put that? They're not leaving that at the door. So how do we do the full report card? Teachers are pressured so much on the academic side, I get that, but what's left out is that our children, we as adults, need to have the skills that help us in the social and emotional areas. And that needs to be put on the table. That needs to be part of the curriculum. That needs to be part of the school community.
You know, I, like a lot of us, was very disturbed by the incident, and I really looked to find exactly what happened, because we'd heard a lot of things. So I'm going to present the way the Huffington Post had the best account that I could tell. I'm going to ask each of you to just kind of weigh in on what might have been done. I realize that maybe the pre-work and the preparatory work to deal with these things before it got to this point. But so here's what they say. The young man, Abel Cedeno, bought the knife, brought it to him because he was being continually bullied. He was subject allegedly to racial and homophobic insults. That day in class, the two boys that he had stabbed, allegedly again, it's just the way it was reported, were sitting behind him and hitting him with paper spitballs and pieces of pencil. We have all been in schools. We've been kids ourselves in schools. We know these things go on. He then went to the bathroom to calm himself. When he returned, the harassment resumed. According to eyewitness reports, he stood up, he turned to face the tormentors and demanded that they stop. One of the boys, the one who died, apparently rushed toward him and punched him. At that point, he drew his knife in self-defense and stabbed him, and then the other boy came to his friend's defense and got stabbed as well. It just seems to me there are so many places in that whole scenario that somebody in that classroom should have put their foot down. I mean, how all right, so the kids do it while the teachers turn to the blackboard and they're throwing things or whatever. But it seems to me this was just happening. Should the teacher have known? Is there something that could have been done to stop it from escalating to that point? I don't want to answer my own question. Or is the situation, she or he, whoever's in the classroom, sees so much of it and they're just like, all right, I can't teach you kids anymore anyway.
I think that listening to that, I'm saying to myself, my God, where is everybody? I mean, I'm not even talking just about the teacher. I'm talking about when you teach conflict resolution and you make it a part of everyday life. Everybody has the skills. You're looking at the social and emotional side of children and the leaders in that school, meaning the teachers, administrators, then everybody's on the same page about what we do
and what we
when
accept.
someone, right, and what we accept. And when someone is being bullied or whatever was happening there, someone says something. Not only that, but if it's happened before that, where's the relationship between that student and the teacher and their peers? Where are those relationships? Because that's what it's about. You go to school not just to learn, but to build relationships. So as a teacher, having been a teacher in a classroom, no, you can't see everything, but my God, you've got to see something, and somebody else has to be able to say, hey, Mr. Miss, you see what's going on here? We're trying to stop this. Give us a hand.
Dr. Porcher, I know in your former career as a police officer, you would know how to handle that, and you probably would be able to put a stop to it immediately. Do you feel that teachers get to understand how to resolve these sufficiently? Are they trained properly? Do they need more input from the School Safety Division or the NYPD on how to handle difficult discipline problems?
Well, it's difficult for me to say if they have enough training, but one thing that I do know is the nuances in education and criminal justice are it's an ever so evolving task, such as social media, things to that effect. These, that advent of technology wasn't in play when I was a student in school, and this is something that the teachers have to stay abreast of. But we have to look at what this situation that happened in the school. There was somewhat of a cursory relationship between the educator and the students because this happened in September. So in the when we have to take in consideration this is the introductory phase of the school year. So you didn't have those empirical relationships between the educators and the students. So that played a big role in this. And so we look at how could we have changed a situation like this? Right. We have to look at I referred to it as a cultural change in the earlier part of this interview, whereas the students have to, I want to say the educators should partner. I want to say people that have I don't want to use the term somebody that has a liaison
of some sort.
All right, somebody that has a level of credibility socially outside of the school, and I don't want to say it's a gang member or a prior felon, but someone that students oftentimes would look to as someone that they respect. You need to infuse those individuals, and you have a lot of these people that do re-entry and peer. And hold these peer conversations about how you should engage with people on the outside. You need those individuals to partner with the educators. So the infusion of those two entities that's how you can. I want to say diffuse a lot of these conflicts, but that's how oftentimes you can get to the root cause of this, because a lot of times these kids, they don't necessarily trust the educators. But when you have this person that has this level of credibility socially, that sits down and has these peer groups with the students and talks about, look, you know what, this is what my situation was in the past. I've been involved in this gang life and things to that effect. However, this is the way to go through with it. But you need to connect that person with a professional. That way you can have the execution that would be sound.
Is your sense that the schools have, let's say, an anti-bullying advocate, and if they don't, should, much like they have a parent-teacher, a parent leadership coordinator, that maybe each school should have an anti-bullying advocate to get involved in, or at least understand the relationships between the students? Sounds like you would think that was a good idea.
That may be the case, but what is the level of expertise with that individual? And as I mentioned earlier, each school, it's not a one fixed solution. What happens in a place like Forest Hills is going to be diametrically different than what happens in the South Bronx. So it goes back to the educator being I want to say the principal being at the forefront of that strategy and enlisting the additional resources of law enforcement, a conflict resolution specialist to employ these level of resources into addressing these conflicts. I don't know if that was in play here, but that's something that needs to constantly evolve as time progresses, because it goes back to nuances and technological advances in our society that in many instances causing these issues.
Right. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I'm going to follow up, but you got
okay.
Clearly you had something you wanted to say.
I want to say that I think going back to the fact that this was the beginning of the year is really a critical moment, because that's the time that you actually want to get the message across of how we conduct ourselves in this classroom. So whether or not you have a solid relationship, you spend the beginning of the year, or should spend the beginning of the year, starting to build relationship, and in particular on how we're going to treat each other in this classroom. So something like this happens beginning of the year, student stands up, all of this is happening, that's the moment that a teacher really does have to step in, or chaos is going to happen throughout the entire school year.
There have been reports since that time that say that this particular school had security problems and had these kinds of discipline problems all along the way, and that this was really just the ultimate expression of that. If you were appointed, and I know you do consult with schools and other groups, if you're in a situation that, Lynne Maureen Hurdle, come in here and talk to the school or help us figure out how to address these kinds of disciplinary and bullying issues, what would you do? Would you set up people around a table? Do you go classroom to classroom? How would you do it?
All of the above. First of all, I
do
love
whatever
it.
you
Yeah,
can.
I love this suggestion because it can't just be one thing. And I think that you've been saying that there are a lot of different ways that you can approach it, but you have to be working in very organized and strategic ways so that you're approaching the entire community. It's sort of like when we see a video going viral. It's that kind of approach. Everybody's got to touch some kind of solution for conflict resolution. Yes, everybody is not necessarily trained, but then you've got to find the people who you can train, and then you've got to spread out to the rest of the community. Number one, students are hardly ever at the table when we start to sit down and talk about what's going on. So I really believe you bring people together and you make sure that you
Including
have
students, especially at the high school level,
Although I've done it in elementary school, students know what's going on. They know what the problems are because they got to deal with it every day. You're not the one getting shoved every day. You're not the one who's getting harassed on social media every day. They are. So bring them to the table along with administrators and teachers and guidance counselors, school safety, community affairs, NYPD. Let's get to what's going on, as you said, specifically in this school. A lot going on in the world, in the community, but what's happening here and what's happening in the community that's affecting here. Let's start there. Then let's look at, do we need a peer mediation program? Probably yes. Do we need to have conflict resolution taught actually in the schools? Do we need 10 minutes at the start of every single day to have students in a circle begin to talk about what's going on and what are the things that they would like to see done about it?
You talked about a viral video. Now let's look at the mood, and I have not been in the school. I don't want to make presumptions, but we're just, I guess, on some level making some presumptions. This incident is now a viral video for that school, and every student and every teacher and every parent knows that this happened, and now the school is famous for exactly the wrong reasons. And then after that, there are metal detectors in the school, and people are cracking down on security. What is the effect of all that on the psyche of the school? Does that serve to help the situation because now, you know what, we don't want to be known as that? Or does that exacerbate the situation because now, this is who we are, and then people try to kind of live up to this reputation that we're a rough and tumble school, and then it becomes even more difficult, even though you've tried to put some security measures in place?
Well, I think what's important is
you're getting the same question, so don't go away.
So what's your next step? I mean, that's who you are right now, right? What's your next step? So if your next step is that's it, we're not doing anything else, we put up the metal detectors and we're not doing anything else, then I think that there are going to be problems, right? But if your next step is, okay, how do we meet this head on? This is what we're faced with. What are the best methods that we can put in place so that we all actually learn how to do this differently? Then you can turn that reputation around.
Right. So, and what are your thoughts about, now that everybody knows that the Urban Assembly School for Wildlife Conservation has had this terrible problem, it's in the psyche, it's in the culture of the school, it's in the history of the school. What do you think that effect is on the future performance? You think it makes people work better together, or you think it makes it even more difficult for a security official to keep order?
Well, it's dependent upon how the organization moves forward. Oftentimes,
what she said,
with
yes.
the schools, I find that most bureaucratic institutions focus on the quantitative piece. How do we bring the numbers down? But they negate the qualitative piece. The qualitative piece is getting to the root causes of these problems. We can always adjust statistics. Statistics are in the eyes of the beholder. So if you say, look, we want to reduce the number of assaults in this particular school, that's something that you can do on paper. But the qualitative piece and connecting with the root causes is what's going to be it's going to be shouldered by the educators. So moving forward to your question in terms of what is the psyche going to be for the students, it's really going to be predicated by the administrators because they're going to be the driving force.
You and I have had numerous conversations right here around this table about all kinds of security issues and policing issues and police shootings and gangs and all those other things. I get the sense that your response here in this dialogue is the same thing, that you're saying, yes, we can arrest people, we can put them in jail, we can create new laws, but unless we have the kinds of dialogues before that, unless we have relationships, you talked about community policing, unless we do that, we're never really going to bring those numbers down. I'm assuming that's the way you see it. It's the same thing.
Right. There's a common statement in law enforcement is you can't arrest your way out of a problem. The key is you have to engage what the issue is. The best case scenario is not one person gets arrested, not one person gets disciplined, and everyone is, there's an amalgamation of these different cultures and everyone acts accordingly. Unfortunately, that's not what we have. So that's what we need the due diligence to be done by the administrators, and that's why I refer to the organizational and cultural changes that are necessary to engage the problem that we have at hand.
Before we run out of time, Lynne Maureen Hurdle, I want you to talk about your upcoming summit. You have, and this is vital for anybody and everybody who is interested in conflict resolution. I know we've got some information, but talk to me about this summit that you're putting together online so anybody can participate.
Right. So first of all, it's free, and
That's
that's
a good
important to
thing.
put out there. It's an online summit. It's
Let's
called
put up that full page, folks. Go
It's
ahead.
called the Soul of Conflict Telesummit, the impact of bold leadership, because leadership is really important. I mean, if we're going to talk about our young people and what they're doing, well, let's look at how we are leading. And so the summit is me in conversation with 7 powerful leaders. I happen to be one of those leaders finally being interviewed. And we're talking about different things in business that are really important for leaders to know. For instance, you need to know how to embrace conflict, because conflict is energy and it can help us change and challenge and inspire the way that we need.
If it's handled properly.
If it's handled properly.
And how do people tune into this? Is
So
there a
they go
time
to-
and date, or they just
It
do it?
starts October 19th, Thursday, October 19th, but you've got to sign up before then, soulofconflictsummit.com.
Right.
Go there, and then what happens is you get an email in your inbox, and each day you get the day's conversation. There's a Facebook group that you can join. So I come on the Facebook group in the evenings for the entire week, October 19th through October 26th. And I'm teaching skills on
Wow.
top of debriefing the
I'll tell you,
videos.
maybe our friends in the DOE, teachers and others should
Yes,
certainly,
join
because that's what
us.
it's designed for. I'll give you 15 seconds, advice for the school and other schools who are concerned about this problem, and you're going to get 15 seconds.
Come
also.
together. Don't ignore the fact that this just happened. Come together, have conversation about how people are doing.
Big round table.
Yes,
Bring everybody
that's
in.
right. And then start talking about how we get to a conflict resolution plan.
I'm guessing you're pretty much in sync with that.
Yes, for the most part. It's a teachable moment for educators and law enforcement. What they need to do is they need to extract from the historical timeline of when these types of incidents have happened in the past, what's worked, what doesn't work, and that's how we can gain some solutions, and that could be the watershed moment moving forward.
Dr. Darrin Porcher, it's so great to have you all the time. And Lynne Maureen Hurdle, I expect that you're going to become a frequent guest. Thank you so much for joining us today.
As always, a pleasure.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Folks, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in our borough of the Bronx, then email them to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org. You can send a tweet to us at BronxTalk or post it on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. You can check out the archives at bronxnet.org. You find Bronx Talk by following the Watch menu on the new BronxNet website. Now, next week it is the debate for the race for City Council in the 13th Council District. And then on the 30th, we will take a look at both sides of the con issue. That is Constitutional Convention. Should we or shouldn't we? And thanks to our producer, Lindsay Violet. Our director is William Guzman. Thanks to the guests, thanks to the cast of thousands, and thanks to you.